Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down something that affects pretty much everyone, property taxes. Specifically, what really happens when a city decides to hike them, like a lot. We'll look at the hidden chain reactions and, more importantly, how we can build smarter, safer policies.
Okay, so picture this. Your city council announces a 300% property tax hike. Just boom, overnight. The rate jumps from, let's say, 1% to 4%. Now, that might sound a little abstract, right? But what does that actually mean for the economy, for the local coffee shop on the corner, for your wallet?
And you know, this isn't just some academic exercise. Getting this right is absolutely critical for policymakers who are trying to balance city budgets without, completely wrecking the local economy. It's all about digging past the headlines to find the real, validated facts.
All right, so here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with a shock to the system, then look at the ripple effect on prices. We'll get into how to find the true number, what the real economic fallout is, and then talk about a poverty-proof safety net and what smarter policy looks like. Let's get into it.
Okay, first up, a shock to the system. Let's zoom right in and see how a decision like this actually lands on the ground, at street level, with a real local business owner. So for a small shop, property tax is what you'd call a fixed cost. It doesn't matter if they have a fantastic month or a really terrible one, that bill is the same. So when that cost suddenly triples, wow, that's not just an inconvenience, it's a direct threat to their survival. They've got to find that money from somewhere, right?
And that's where we start to see the ripple effect. Because one shop's problem, well, it doesn't stay one shop's problem for long. It sends a shockwave through the whole local economy.
This is a perfect illustration of that chain reaction, what economists call the pass-through effect. So the tax hike happens. That means higher costs for the business. But here's the thing. Businesses rarely just eat that cost themselves. Nope. They pass it through to us, the customers, in the form of higher prices. And just like that, one business's problem is now everybody's problem.
And if you look at the data here, you'll see the impact isn't the same for everyone. It hits some businesses harder than others. The ones that deal directly with customers, retail shops, restaurants, they get hammered. Their operating costs can jump by almost 25%. They just don't have the wiggle room to absorb that kind of shock, so they're forced to pass it on.
So what happens when you average all of this out across the whole economy? Well, that single 300% property tax hike leads to a 4.2% jump in the Consumer Price Index, or in plain English, inflation. That's a serious hit to your purchasing power. Everything just got more expensive.
But wait a minute. How do we know that 4.2% number is the right one? Well, this is where things get really interesting. It's kind of like a detective story, all about the hunt for the true, unbiased number. And here's the main point. When you're trying to measure something this important, the tools you use are everything. I mean, you can get wildly different answers depending on how you crunch the numbers. The real challenge is finding the actual cause and effect, not just some scary-sounding correlation that grabs headlines. Okay, check this out, because this is fascinating. On the left, we have an estimate from a simple, pretty standard model. It spits out this huge, scary number that suggests a totally catastrophic impact. But it's an imposter. On the right, we have a much more sophisticated, validated model, and it reveals the true impact is actually less than half that size. It's still a big deal for sure, but it's credible. And this is exactly why the how of the research matters so much.
So why was that first number so off? It boils down to a classic problem in statistics called endogeneity. It's basically a fancy word for mixing up cause and effect. The simple model couldn't tell if the tax hike was causing inflation or if maybe a booming economy was already causing prices to rise, and that's what gave the city the confidence to raise taxes. It gets it all tangled up. It's exactly like concluding that selling more ice cream causes hot weather. It's the other way around.
Now, the more advanced method, it's called GMM for short, uses some really clever techniques to isolate the true effect of just the tax hike. And what you're seeing here is basically its report card. These diagnostic tests, they're like a super strict quality control check. And because this model passes with flying colors, it gets a clean bill of health. That tells us we can trust the result. We found the real number.
Okay, so now that we have our validated, trustworthy number, let's take a look at the full economic fallout from that 300% tax hike. And yeah, the validated data paints a pretty stark picture. We've got that 4.2% jump in consumer prices, for sure. But it doesn't stop there. Commercial rents can go up by over 10%. The risk of small businesses having to close their doors for good, that rises significantly. And this isn't just about numbers on a page, right? This is about jobs, about people's livelihoods being put on the line. Which brings us to a really critical question. Let's say a city has to raise more money. How can it do that without completely pushing its most vulnerable people over the edge?
Well, this is where the researchers propose a really innovative solution. They call it a poverty-proof firewall. And the idea isn't to stop tax changes altogether, but to build this automatic, data-driven safety net that can catch the people who are hit the hardest.
And how it works is actually brilliant in its simplicity. So step 1, before you even pass the policy, you run simulations to see who might get hurt. Step 2, you watch the real-world data like a hawk, things like food security. If those numbers cross a preset danger line for a few months, an alarm goes off. And then step 3, relief gets deployed automatically. Things like tax credits or cash transfers targeted right at the people who need it most.
So what's the big takeaway here? What are the key lessons we can learn for smarter, better governance?
Let's boil it down to the 4 key takeaways. First, big, sudden tax hikes have these massive, cascading effects that ripple through everything. Second, to really understand the impact, you have to use sophisticated, validated methods. The simple stuff can be misleading. Third, and this is a big one, a gradual phase-in over, say, 5 years can seriously reduce that initial economic shock. And finally, innovative ideas like that poverty-proof firewall show that, yes, it is possible to balance a city's budget while still protecting its most vulnerable citizens.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. It's never a question of if our cities will face budget challenges. They always will. The real question is how they choose to solve them. And what this research makes clear is that with the right data and the right frameworks, there are much smarter, much safer paths we can take.